In Washington, D.C., a powerful new development is shaking the diplomatic landscape between Nigeria and the United States. For months, quiet but persistent lobbying efforts by human rights advocates, Biafran groups, and Nnamdi Kanu's international legal team have been pushing American lawmakers to act. Now, that effort has paid off. A group of prominent American senators has officially introduced a new legislative bill aimed at protecting ethnic minorities in Nigeria, particularly the Igbo people, who have long complained of marginalization and violent persecution. The bill, known as the Ethnic Minority Protection and Anti-Terrorism Accountability Act, was introduced by Senator Cory Booker, Senator Bob Menendez, and Senator Chris Van Hollen, three influential members of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. According to early reports from Capitol Hill, this legislation is designed to do two key things. 1. Protect minority ethnic groups in Nigeria and other parts of Africa from targeted violence and discrimination. 2. Impose sanctions, travel bans, and criminal accountability on anyone, whether in government, the military, or private organizations, who commits or sponsors acts of terrorism and human rights abuses. This marks a major shift in how the United States is engaging with African internal conflicts. Instead of issuing mere statements, the U.S. Senate is moving toward direct legal action, ensuring that perpetrators of violence against civilians can face justice even outside their home countries. Behind this new bill lies months of unseen diplomatic work. While public attention was focused on court proceedings in Nigeria, a quiet diplomatic network was being built abroad. Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's legal representatives, led by barrister Aloy Ejimeka, worked hand-in-hand with international human rights lawyers and Biafran diaspora groups based in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Their goal was simple but strategic: to make world leaders understand that the situation in Nigeria's southeast region is not just a local political issue, it's a human rights crisis deserving of international concern. To achieve this, Kanu's team coordinated dozens of documented reports, videos, and testimonies from families affected by violence. They presented this evidence to U.S. congressional aides, policy analysts, and international NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the Carter Center. These groups verified the reports and brought them to the attention of lawmakers in Washington. By late August, the momentum had built enough for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to schedule a closed-door briefing. During that session, detailed evidence of extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests, and the destruction of property in parts of the southeast was presented. It was a turning point. One of the committee members reportedly remarked, "If this were happening anywhere else, the world would have acted sooner." Shortly afterward, Senator Cory Booker, known for his consistent defense of minority rights and global justice, took the lead in drafting the first version of the bill. He was quickly joined by Senator Bob Menendez, who previously chaired the Foreign Relations Committee, and Senator Chris Van Hollen, a longtime advocate for democratic accountability in Africa. Together, they introduced the bill for formal review in the Senate. The Ethnic Minority Protection and Anti-Terrorism Accountability Act not only condemns violence against peaceful ethnic groups but also empowers the U.S. government to act when foreign governments or armed forces violate basic human rights. Under the proposed law, anyone found guilty of targeting civilians based on ethnic or political identity could face frozen assets, international travel bans, and prosecution under U.S. jurisdiction if they have links to the United States or its allies. For the first time, the Igbo people and other minorities in Nigeria have found strong legal backing from a world power. This development signals that the global community is now paying attention. Diplomatic insiders in Washington revealed that the bill gained significant support after several U.S.-based Biafran organizations held peaceful meetings and symposiums across cities like New York, Houston, and Atlanta. These events drew attention from policymakers, human rights lawyers, and civil society leaders, who began to call for immediate action. American media outlets also played a quiet but key role. Opinion pieces in the Washington Post, Foreign Policy magazine, and The Hill raised awareness about the need for targeted sanctions to stop human rights violations in Nigeria. That media attention put pressure on the U.S. Senate to respond decisively. Meanwhile, back in Nigeria, many observers were caught off guard by the development. While local reports focused on court hearings and internal politics, few realized that international diplomacy had moved far ahead. Kanu's legal and diplomatic strategy had shifted the struggle from the courtroom to the global legislative arena. This was not about confrontation or politics. It was about documentation, evidence, and law. It was about building a credible case that even the world's most powerful lawmakers could not ignore. For many in the diaspora, this breakthrough represents a historic moment, a sign that their years of advocacy, petitions, and protests were finally producing results. It is also a reminder that change can come not just through anger or resistance, but through consistent diplomatic engagement. In the words of one US-based human rights coordinator who worked on the campaign, this is not a Biafra versus Nigeria issue. It's a human rights issue. It's about protecting innocent lives. As the bill now moves through Senate committees for further debate, one thing is clear: the voices that were once silenced in Nigeria have found a stage in Washington. And for the first time, the world is beginning to listen. While many people in Nigeria believed that Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's case was being fought only in courtrooms, a much deeper and more powerful battle was quietly unfolding behind the scenes. A diplomatic mission built on facts, law, and international pressure. This strategy didn't involve protests, confrontations, or threats. It was built on calm persistence, credible evidence, and professional diplomacy. Kanu's legal and diplomatic teams understood that the world reacts not to emotion but to proof and principles. So, they began a detailed documentation of every violation that had taken place in the southeast region, every arrest, every raid, every case of unlawful detention or civilian death. These reports were not written casually. Each one was verified by witnesses, photographs, and video footage, often submitted through trusted international partners. Then they were compiled and presented in a structured manner, something that could stand in any international human rights court. The person who coordinated most of this effort was Barrister Aloy Ejimeka, Kanu's legal counsel in Nigeria, working hand in hand with international human rights lawyers based in the United States and the United Kingdom. They formed a diplomatic bridge, connecting the realities on the ground in Nigeria to policymakers in Washington, D.C., London, Brussels, and Geneva. While court cases continued in Abuja, Kanu's representatives reached out to Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the United Nations Human Rights Council, submitting petitions and verified human rights reports. These petitions highlighted how certain operations in the southeast region had resulted in civilian casualties, illegal arrests, and destruction of property. At the same time, Biafran diaspora groups in America began to play their part. They organized peaceful conferences, wrote letters to senators, and met with congressional aides. The key message was consistent: we are not asking for favoritism. We are asking for fairness, for human rights, for justice under international law. This clear and respectful tone made a huge difference. It changed the image of the movement from being seen as a political agitation to being understood as a legitimate human rights struggle. Behind closed doors, diplomatic meetings were taking place in American offices that few Nigerians knew about. Lobbying firms and human rights advisors helped translate the documentation into legal terms that American lawmakers could act upon. By doing so, Kanu's team effectively internationalized the case, turning it into a matter of global concern. According to sources close to the process, a major turning point came when several US lawmakers were shown detailed reports prepared by lawyers working with Kanu's legal defense team. The reports contained timelines, video evidence, and testimonies that clearly showed patterns of abuse. The evidence was compelling enough to convince the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the matter could not be ignored. It was after this point that the Senate began discussions that led to the drafting of the Ethnic Minority Protection and Anti-Terrorism Accountability Act. The name itself was chosen carefully, to show that the bill was not about taking sides politically, but about establishing justice and protection for all minority groups affected by violence or discrimination in Nigeria and across Africa. The US senators involved, Cory Booker, Bob Menendez, and Chris Van Hollen, are known for their work in international justice and minority rights. They have been involved in similar laws addressing persecution in Myanmar, Sudan, and Ethiopia. When Kanu's situation and the plight of the Igbo people were presented to them, they saw it as part of a larger global issue: the protection of minorities from state or non-state violence. It's important to understand that Kanu's diplomatic victory did not come overnight. It was the result of years of persistent engagement, countless petitions, and consistent communication with international institutions. Even when he was detained, his message of peace, justice, and accountability continued through his lawyers and representatives abroad. Barrister Ejimeka and others ensured that every international organization they reached understood that their goal was not to destabilize Nigeria, but to ensure fairness and equality under the law. That made the message easier for global leaders to support. As these diplomatic efforts gained traction, global media outlets began to take interest. BBC Africa, Al Jazeera, and the Washington Post ran pieces about human rights concerns in Nigeria's southeast region. Each publication increased awareness and pressure, indirectly supporting the legislative process already underway in the U.S. Senate. Behind the scenes, top diplomats at the U.S. State Department and U.S. mission in Nigeria began coordinating with rights organizations to assess the situation more closely. It became clear that what was being described was not just a political problem. It was a humanitarian and legal issue that required international attention. By the time the bill was formally introduced, KONU's diplomatic network had achieved something extraordinary. They had transformed what started as a regional cry for justice into an international legislative agenda. The beauty of this success was that it came without violence, without confrontation, and without disrespect. It was achieved through law, truth, and careful diplomacy, exactly the way global change should happen. For the first time in years, the movement had shifted from being described as a local agitation to being recognized as a legitimate human rights campaign on the world stage. And while KONU remains detained, the work of his legal and diplomatic representatives has already begun to reshape how the world views ethnic justice in Nigeria. The American Senate's involvement shows that peaceful diplomatic pressure, when properly organized, can achieve more than any protest or uprising ever could. In the end, this chapter of the story is not just about KONU himself. It's about the power of persistence, documentation, and truth. It's about how one man's voice, when backed by law and evidence, can echo all the way from a detention cell in Nigeria to the legislative chambers of the United States Senate. The introduction of the Ethnic Minority Protection and Anti-Terrorism Accountability Act in the U.S. Senate has far-reaching implications not only for Ndigbo in Nigeria but also for the entire African continent. For decades, many minority ethnic groups in Africa have faced discrimination, targeted attacks, and a lack of justice. This new American legislation signals a change, a global message that no government, group, or individual can violate human rights and escape accountability. If the bill passes, it will officially allow the U.S. government to take action against anyone proven to have sponsored or carried out violence against civilians in Nigeria. That means politicians, military officers, or armed groups found guilty of ethnic persecution could face travel bans, asset freezes, and prosecution under international law. For Ndigbo, this represents more than a political victory. It's a human rights shield. It means that the suffering of innocent people in the southeast has finally caught the world's attention in a way that brings real legal consequences. Many Igbo communities, especially those abroad, see this as a form of justice for years of silence and neglect. Diplomatic experts believe that once enacted, the new law will create a strong deterrent effect. Nigerian officials, security agencies, and local actors will now think twice before engaging in unlawful arrests, extrajudicial killings, or violent raids. The fear of facing American sanctions is a powerful motivator for change. The law also includes a monitoring system. Every year, the U.S. Department of State will be required to submit a Human Rights and Minority Protection report to Congress, specifically reviewing situations in countries like Nigeria where ethnic and religious tensions are high. This means that Nigeria's treatment of its citizens will now be under permanent international review. That kind of scrutiny is new. It ensures that issues involving the Igbo people and other minorities will not be hidden anymore. Any pattern of abuse will be documented and acted upon. For human rights advocates, this is a major breakthrough, one that could reshape how African governments handle internal conflicts. The act is also expected to strengthen global partnerships for justice. Once the US establishes this legal framework, the European Union, Canada, and the United Kingdom are likely to follow with similar legislation. That would make it nearly impossible for anyone involved in ethnic violence to operate freely or enjoy protection abroad. It's important to note that this move does not target Nigeria as a country. Instead, it targets impunity, the long-standing habit of committing crimes against civilians without consequence. It promotes accountability, fairness, and respect for law. In doing so, it supports the rights of all Nigerians, not just Ndigbo. For Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's movement, this development marks a new chapter. It validates years of peaceful advocacy, petitions, and diplomatic engagement. It also proves that diplomacy and truth are stronger than violence or rebellion. Konu's team has shown that international law can become a tool for justice when used correctly. Many Igbo leaders and community groups have welcomed the development, calling it a moral victory for the people. According to reports from the Biafran diaspora in the US, this legislation has already inspired new unity among Igbo professionals and youth organizations abroad. They now see diplomacy as a clear path to achieving lasting peace and recognition. Human rights lawyers also believe the act will improve Nigeria's image in the long run. It will push the government to strengthen its internal justice system, reform its security agencies, and protect citizens more effectively. International accountability does not weaken a nation. It helps build one that is more transparent and respected. For Africa, the implications are even greater. The law will set a precedent, showing that Western nations can hold perpetrators accountable for violence, regardless of their political position or nationality. From Sudan to Ethiopia, from Congo to Cameroon, minority groups facing persecution can now point to the Nigerian case as evidence that justice is possible through peaceful international engagement. Diplomatically, it strengthens the idea that human rights are not local matters, they are global responsibilities. This will make African leaders more cautious in handling internal security issues, knowing that the world is watching closely. In practical terms, the law will empower advocacy groups. They can now work directly with American and European institutions to file verified reports, request sanctions, and seek justice for victims of abuse. This makes it harder for crimes against civilians to be covered up or ignored. For Ndigbo, who have often felt forgotten in the political landscape, this is a reminder that their voice matters. The journey from ignored petitions to a US Senate bill is proof that persistence pays off. It shows that when a people stay consistent, peaceful, and organized, their cause can cross oceans and reach the halls of power. The message is simple but powerful. Truth and law will always find their way to light. No matter how long it takes, justice will eventually prevail, especially when fought with integrity, patience, and wisdom. As the US Senate prepares for final discussions on the bill, the eyes of millions across Nigeria and Africa are watching. Whether or not it passes in the coming months, the world has already received the message. Human rights cannot be negotiated away, and minority lives can no longer be treated as expendable. This is the dawn of a new chapter for Ndigbo, and a new lesson for Africa, that justice, when pursued with discipline and diplomacy, always finds a voice at the highest levels of power.